Okay, welcome to Volume 2 of Bayside Book Chat. Again, my daughter Parker Jean is behind the camera, and she's also my producer and editor. So she's got a lot of responsibilities with this. So welcome. We're coming to you from Barrier Island Books and Art in Stone Harbor, New Jersey. Wearing the Support Stone Harbor garb today. If you have not seen the first episode, we are on YouTube. Search Barrier Island Books and Art, and then on our homepage for Facebook, again, Barrier Island Books and Art. You might want to watch it. It'll help you out with the second edition that we're doing tonight. And if you had seen that, you would know that tonight is wine night. Actually, tonight's Tuesday, but until we get the live shots down, we're pre-taping because anybody that followed us last week knew that we had a little bit of a hiccup and it took too long to, I talked so long that it took too long to download the video. So pretend it's Wednesday night. Try to watch it on Wednesday night and have a glass of wine with me on Wednesday night. So in the summer, as mentioned, we have a wine night, and it's a night to share in books, stories, family, and friends. The bay is right back there, so we're calling it the Bayside Book Chat, and it's along the lines of FDR trying to talk to the nation, to explain some things, and also to encourage and help people through the tough times from the Depression through World War II. Last week, you'll know, because it's wine night, that I had I created my own sponsor. Fred's is the parking lot right next door. I'm trying to represent wines that relate to the book. So last week we did a Chianti in honor of Silence of the Lambs, and this week The Sun Also Rises pretty much starts off with them drinking too much through France and Spain in the 1920s. So this is a French red wine that I got at my pseudo sponsor over there, Fred's Tavern. So I'm going to feature every week a quote by Hemingway which relates to wine. And he says somewhere, sometime, "My only regret in life is I didn't drink more wine." Ernest Hemingway. Getting back to FDR, we mentioned why he did it, and along the lines of why we're doing it. And getting back to quotes, we're going to do some quotes on presidential leadership, and we're going to start with FDR. And of course, he's famous for, and I got a lot more of these coming every week, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Truman, and this is something to think about, and I won't say names, but we talk about mindset in here. Get your mind around this. Truman said, "The buck stops here," and he had a sign on his desk. Washington, we mentioned that my relative had written a book about him, but he's a biographer. We've got that in here. Truman, David McCullough, great American history writer, that takes care of Truman. FDR, Beloved Island, Frank and Eleanor, and Legacy of Campobello, which my wife Marnie's uncle and aunt have a home on Campobello Island. Come talk to us about it on wine night sometime. It's a very unique place. It's where FDR had a summer home, and it's the only park, I guess, in the world or North America that has dual park ownership, which, because it's on the border between Canada, it's technically in Canada, but it was an American president's summer home. So it is considered both a U.S. park and a Canadian park. But the book's about Campobello in the life of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Getting back to Washington, here's the aforementioned book that I said that my relative had been a biographer of Washington, and this is one of his books. And Washington said, "It's better to offer no excuse than a bad one." And he also said, "If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." Kennedy, they wrote a book about him, PT 109. I've had copies of that in here before. But he wrote, of course, Profiles in Courage. This happens to be the memorial edition, which is obviously after his death. So for book collectors, this is the third in prominence. The most valuable book would have been when he wrote the book pre-presidential, when he was a senator. Then, after he became president of the United States, there was a presidential edition. This is after he passed away, and this is called the Memorial Edition. But obviously, this is a very famous book on presidential, or not really presidential, but leadership from people. Kennedy said, "We must use time as a tool, not as a couch." So we all have a lot of time right now, and there's nothing wrong with taking a little bit of a break, but put your mind and your body to good use while you have it. And then, of course, his most famous quote, which is very relevant now: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And the best thing we can do for our country right now, because the only thing that's working, the only thing that's proven to work, is spatial distancing. And that's the only way we're going to mitigate this and get ahead of it, to buy time for science to solve this problem. So the best thing you can do to honor your country and your fellow countrymen right now is stay away from each other. In honor of that sacrifice that people are making, especially the people on the front line, I here would like to thank, of course, all the first responders, healthcare workers, and nurses that are out in the front lines, including, and best wishes to my niece, Emma, who is in Norway at the end of her medical school career, where obviously they're putting people to work, and she's been helping receive people and diagnosing possibly whether they do or do not have the coronavirus. That is the end of page 1. And I put a note on the bottom of that that says toast. So here's a toast to all those that are putting themselves on the front lines, and even that's down to your gas station attendant in New Jersey, because we don't pump our own gas, and retail workers, which I am one, and to all those, cheers. So last week we mentioned some fiction that had to do with what we're dealing with right now, plagues and pandemics. And of course we mentioned Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton, Hot Zone by Richard Preston, which became the movie Outbreak. I forgot one last week, Stephen King, The Stand. He'll scare your pants off with anything he writes about, so we can't forget about that one. Interestingly enough, in the news, there was a Scottish author that wrote a book about a pandemic in London that at the time, the publishers rejected it because they thought it was too unreal or surreal. It was called Lockdown. Well, it was all about a pandemic, and now they are actually releasing the book because now it seems to make a lot more sense. But the most interesting thing I saw in the news this week was, and I have a copy, I don't know where it is, it's obviously a quality reprint, it's not the original, but the original was written 700 years ago. And there was an author, Giovanni Boccaccio, can't say I can pronounce that, it's got a lot of C's in it. He wrote a book, and I don't know if I can pronounce this, Decameron. And it was 100 tales of wit and life lessons of early Italian life in Florence. And it was written right after, inspired by the event, the Black Plague in 1348. The book was published in 1353. 100 tales of wit and life lessons, and it had a lot of introspect in stories and tales regarding what people in Italy, and especially in Florence, went through during the Black Plague. I spoke about our own history authors last week, and I mentioned Erik Larson. And this story's apropos in a way, because it's about telling about something that may happen in front of our eyes, but then not having people believe him. So Erik Larson wrote a book called Isaac Storm, A Man, a Time, in the Deadliest Hurricane in History. In 1900 in Galveston, Texas, a meteorologist using buoy reports, weather observations, and getting information from telegraph, I believe, was able to formulate that due to the barometric pressure drop, a bad storm was coming. People did not believe him. They did not believe him. They did not believe him. And thousands of people died in Galveston, Texas. Erik Larson, the book is called Isaac's Storm. Which leads back into somebody well, I could go a little bit of a different direction, but I had a little comment here, which will lead into the next thing, which is, last week I talked about how science and history can guide us, that we ought to listen to people, which relates to the Eric Larson book. And a question to me becomes, who do you want to believe? Paid lobbyists or marginally paid scientists? Do you want to believe the tobacco, oil industries when it comes to environmental global issues sea rise, and as Rachel Carson lobbied for in the 70s when she wrote the great book Silent Spring, the effects of DDT, and of course we can extrapolate that now onto pandemics. George Bush read a book in 2005, I think, that was a scientist who had written a book about the possibility of plagues, and actually George Bush Jr. Pushed it with Homeland Security and his health, and they actually made a lot of progress on that, and obviously we did not have much follow-through of late in regard to that type of stuff. And this stuff will be studied. After 9/11, we had the 9/11 report. After Kennedy's assassination, we had investigations. We had an investigation after the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. And there's going to be not only authors writing about what occurred and whether this country or the world was prepared, but the country itself will do an investigation, and they have to, because we have to know what happened so we can better serve ourselves in the future. Switching gears, lighten it up a little bit. I don't read as much as I would like to because I spend too much time, researching books, to be honest with you. And I don't sit down sometimes and read a whole book from front to back. But now we all have cabin fever. I just completed One Man's Wilderness. And if you know from watching PBS documentaries in the wintertime when they're having their fundraisers, this is about a gentleman, Richard Prenneke, who in the 60s decided in his own mid-50s to challenge himself to see if whether he could go into Alaska, build a cabin, survive on his own. And he did so well, he never left for 30 years. And he kept a diary. And it was about his personal musings on life, his observations of nature. And he detailed how he built this cabin, how he fed himself. And the way he wrote was just very, very soothing and respectful of so many things. So if you have cabin fever and you are industrious or outdoorsy, you love nature, a great read is One Man's Wilderness, the story of Richard Prenneke. That is the end of that page. I don't know what number that was. We talking about nature. We talked about Rachel Carson with Silent Spring, and she had a quote which is, "Only within the moment of time represented by the present century as one species, man, acquired significant power to alter the nature of the world." And of course, right now we have a virus that's jumped from animal to man. And of course, air travel, of course, is a big part of this. And, as our homesteads creep into the natural world, we're obviously going to have more conflict between man and nature. She was very observant of that. Somebody else that was very observant of the relationship between man and nature was J.R.R. Tolkien. And for those of you who don't know, there was a lot of symbolism in his books. And in the trilogy, you see that the trees walk, and they end up taking the fight. And they were in defense of themselves. They were in defense of nature. The trees were representing that nature was fed up. Tolkien had seen during World War II the devastation that war caused on not only the human species, but on nature. And he also had a great disdain for industrialization. He was very pro-environment, just in a different way than maybe Rachel Carson was. And he preferred country and nature to the cities. And he has a great quote about life. And it is, "If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world." And think about all those words that are in there as it relates to his trilogy. A merrier world, the Shire, hoarded gold, the gold that the dragon protected. And then again, like I said last week with Mindset, you've got George Orwell in 1984. The book has been described as a representation of historical negativism. I spit that out, which basically is denialism. And it is, the premise of the book is the effects of what distortion of historical records can do. And there in the U.S., we can obviously discuss freedom of the press, and then, like I mentioned last week, with authors writing books, putting their names on it, an historical record. Going to switch to an even more lighter note. We're going to go back to beach reads, and I had to call up a friend of mine, Jody Miner, today because I suffer from, I guess somebody would call it a combination of bad memory and sometimes what I self-describe as spatial dyslexia, which is I sometimes get things opposite all the time and I can never get it straight in my head. And there's two things that occur with some of the books that I'm going to talk about. Is the first author wrote a lot of books about the Outer Banks, and Jody is a big fan and I'm a big fan. We've all been going down there for 30 years, 40 years. Love the Outer Banks. And Nicholas Sparks wrote some books on the Outer Banks, and there's a town down there that for years I get confused whether people call it Redante or Redanti, or so I called Jody, and you got to put the H in it, so it's Redanti. And then on your way to the Outer Banks, what do you cross? You cross the Cape May Lewes Ferry. It is spelled E-W-E-S like lose, but it is not pronounced that way in that town. It is pronounced Lewis. So Nicholas Sparks, got a pile here somewhere. Right here. He wrote, like I said, Nights in Rodanthe, Message in a Bottle, and Onward. A lot of books about romance along the beaches. And then we do very well in the store with a lot of writers who write about the beach, but more in a detective setting. Stuart Woods, Randy Wayne White, who wrote Sanibel Flats and follow-up stories from that. The infamous Carl Hyacin. And then a gentleman who passed away this past year, who wrote both nonfiction and fiction. It was his nonfiction that inspired the fiction. He wrote about a lot of sea sagas, but his nonfiction was stories of discovering sunken ships. And that's Clive Cussler, and he wrote The Sea Hunters. And that is the end of that page. Fine tonight. Cheers. Last week we had one cut off. My producer cut off my toast to my brother and his Norwegian family, which is Skull. So Skull. So last week I mentioned PBS, and I bragged about how of that list of 120 books that readers in the U.S. Hailed as their favorites. I went back to the list and I tried to see how many I had again. And oddly enough, the only reason I don't have all 10, am I missing one? Or was that something else I was talking about earlier today? Anyway, I was missing a book earlier today. I had 1984 and I couldn't find it, but I just realized I had sold 2 copies before we had to get shut down. I hope I have all in this top 10. If not, it was a valiant try. But maybe some of you could guess this, but the #1 novel rated by the American Reader, this is a reprint collectible box set, but this is what the original book looked like. To Kill a Mockingbird was touted as the #1 fiction novel in the U.S., and of course a very poignant story. I'll put that back together later. We mentioned last week how my wife loves the Outlander series. That was #2 fan favorite. Again, in 10 years, they could do a new list and it all could change. But right now, last year, this is what they picked. So the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. The series of all the Harry Potter books was #3. The 4th, Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The aforementioned, for many different reasons, Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series was 5th. This is a first-year printing, but not the first printing of the book. This is a true copy, hardback copy, Gone with the Wind. A great children's book. This is a early printing, not the first, but an early printing, but this is a $50 book. If anybody has it on their shelf, and if you ever need help evaluating books on what are true first and first editions versus later common printings, we're always here to help you. This is, and you can tell by the inside book cover, Charlotte's Web. A very famous book of the last year, Little Women, Louisa May Alcott, which in a future episode, there are some things we'd like to share about her life and how crisscrossed with some other American authors. Getting back to Tolkien, one of his buddies that they shared a lot of discussions on philosophy and religion, C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, in the Wardrobe series. Chronicles of Narnia, I guess, is really what the series is. That was the title of it. And the 10th, Jane Eyre. So, next week we'll do another 10. Hopefully I've got all those. That. I will have a quick sip because it is wine night. Oh. Here it is, trivia. We're done with the book chat. Now we're on to the trivia. We'll announce the winner of the end of Volume 1 at the end. The good news is we had a lot of viewers of our book chat. I just need a few more people to participate in the trivia. I had people tell me it was too Stone Harbor specific. That was all my out-of-town relatives. Too bad, locals only. But I will try to add in some other things that aren't as local. And some other people complaining it was too long, too hard. But, hey, I don't think it's changing much this week. So to rattle off the winners, or the winning questions and then the winner, last week was, what was the bicentennial year? 2014. What was the first beach tag year? 1971, and the color was blue. What is our island name? Both Stone Harbor and Avalon together. 7 Mile Islands. Bonus points, which count for a point each. Earlier names of the island. And if anybody has more, because I have one more which I can't prove, there might be more. But Lemmings, Leamings, and then in 1878, the owner of the island, which people refer to on maps, is Tatham's, Tatham's beach. The postcard, what president, governor visited our bridge to dedicate it. The year was 1911. The bridge coming into town, it was Woodrow Wilson. I kind of flubbed up a little bit and kind of confused people by mentioning a library. It was not our public library. It was the elementary school library. It was named after a very famous national author who also, in spending some time in this area, wrote 2 books about this area. One of them was specifically about 7 Mile Island. The author was Stephen Meter. The book is called The Fishhawk's Nest. And of course, the real name of the common name fishhawk is an osprey, which they just appeared again, like they do every year, a couple days before the first day of spring in that ballpark, St. Patty's Day, somewhere around there. They are back. The boating class up at the yacht club that is famous is called the Comet. The mayor, Judy Davies Dunauer. The previous mayor, Suzanne Walters. Wildwood, the name of this beach, we're 7 Mile. They're called 5 Mile Beach. 2 other names, Holly Beach, and then south of Wildwood in the Wildwood Crest area, Diamond Beach. Another name for North Wildwood, Anglesey. And the hard question last week was, what's the oldest Cape May County town? Founded in 1632 by descendants of the Mayflower and also some whalers, Townbank. And the winner is, all the way chiming in from the hills of North Carolina, Lynn Masseri has earned a $25 book credit to add on to her credit for the book she's dropped off at the store. And anybody else who's sending answers gets a $5 credit. So going forward, if you want that $25 or you want $5 for at least sending in your answers, here's Volume 2. What is the name of the New Jersey state flower? Question 2. What is the name of New Jersey's state bird? It's a very pretty bird. This is question 3. What famous book did Rachel Carson write that spoke to the effects of DDT, which affected our birds and our bees? Last week, I mentioned a book that was written by a Norwegian explorer, Thor Heyerdahl, and he wrote about his voyages proving the Peruvians' ability to float across the Pacific in a raft. What was the name of the book? I was wearing the t-shirt. What was Michael Crichton's book that was about microbes coming back to Earth from a returning satellite, written, I guess, in the 50s or 60s? Number 6, what bar restaurant in Stone Harbor, and this bar is no longer open, this is from days gone by, was renowned for maybe even a state record length of a shuffleboard game? Question 7, what bird was overhunted to make women's hats out of its feathers? I'm bringing this up because it's Easter soon, and the Ocean City and Atlantic City Boardwalk were famous for people in the 20s and 30s wearing beautiful women's hats ordained in the feathers of this beautiful bird that was killed to harvest its feathers. And somehow I lost 8, 9, and 10. So let me look to see if I have the bottom of that page. If not, we're going to have to end it at 7. All right, we're back. I found it. 8. What year had a hurricane which damaged most of the local Jersey Shore beach towns' boardwalks and wiped many of them out? What year was there a major hurricane that damaged nearly every boardwalk in all our Jersey Shore towns? I will give you a clue. It's not in the last, 10, 20, 30 years. This is earlier. And in this area, one of the most famous storms was not a hurricane. The storm happened in 1962. What month of the year did the storm happen? And it was not a hurricane. What kind of storm was it? And that is the end of the questions. You're more than welcome to do your own research, look them up. We all know it's the day and age of Google. No harm, no foul there, because we all want you to have fun and learn. And I'd rather have you have fun looking things up and learning about things than just being stumped. Side notes, we're almost to the end here. Along the lines of what we're doing here, some local musicians are doing happy hour every day. A lot of you know that my wife is a local entertainer and heavily involved in the music industry. A lot of our local musicians who, some of them, that's their only job, are putting on virtual happy hours. And if you search on Facebook for virtual Cape May, you will find access. If not, go to Marnie and Nate's music page or this store's page. We'll try to put some posts up so you can get the links to watch that. Again, thank you to the frontline people, no matter what you do, who are out there risking exposure to move things forward, including my niece Emma. Thank you for viewing. Keep low, aim high, be smart, be safe, and until next week, cheers.